there's a study of animals. And this is an apokursic study. It's called anthropology, right? Anthropology is the study of people as they evolve from animals. So they look at animals, different kinds of animals. There's a whole bunch of levels, and they analyze how animals live and what are the criterion that they come up with. In other words, if you see a human being as an evolution of animals, which is not hepecha, it's hepecha common sense, but scientists are so smart that they lost their common sense, they replaced it with artificial intelligence, which makes them brilliant and dumb as a wall, both at the same time. But if you see human beings as an evolution, what do they show you? They show you that animals, three things you got to have. Number one, you got to stay alive. Can't be eaten. You're able to run away from an enemy, or able to fight back from an enemy, or hide from an enemy, whatever tricks you use. Number two, you got to eat. And number three, you got to procreate. You have to have babies. Which leads to number four, you have to have space. Every animal needs a territory. Now, how they negotiate the way they share that territory with other animals of their own type, with other animals of different types, is a whole spiel. This is basic, and any person who studies biology knows this. It's not just true of animals, it's true even of plants. Plants need to stay alive, which means when you try to eat a leaf, the leaf develops a toxin which makes it hard for you to digest because it doesn't want to be eaten. Right? Number two, it needs nourishment. It needs water, it needs carbon dioxide, it needs phosphorus, whatever chemicals it needs, and there's competition, don't kid yourself. There's not enough. So every animal, every plant figures out how to compete for its share of the provisions so that it could procreate. And number three, it has to have babies. That's why trees and plants put an enormous amount of energy into creating seeds. Some of them are attractive, some of them are tough, some of them float, some of them are carried on the wind. Every animal, every plant figured another way of staying alive. Three basic needs, okay, which adds up to a fourth, right? The three are, I got to stay alive, I got to eat food, I got to have babies, and I need space. That's called survival. Now, what happens if you have extra time or extra energy? So you do such things as play. You play. You run around, you frolic, you have fun, you can afford it. For an animal to have extra time, which allows it to play, requires that its provisions of food are sufficient, or there's enough food for them to eat, and most importantly, that they feel safe. That they don't feel like they have to hide, somebody should eat them up. Small animals go out, they eat food, they go back in their hole, and they stay there till they're hungry again. That's it. They can't afford to play. Why? Because they're going to get eaten. You understand? So when they study animals and what they call evolution, this is what they observe. Higher animals are stronger, are bigger, are healthier, have an easy time accessing food, so they began to play. And of course, play is really a form of learning. So they learn new behavior. That's how they explain it in evolutionary terms. And then, the highest animals are monkeys and primates. They have the most time. And their food is easiest to access. And they have the most time to play. So this is how the way he explained it in evolution is, so they develop bigger brains, and they learn new things. They have time to actually find new ways of finding food, because they have time to play with. Other animals need to eat leaves, because that's all they have the time for. They have no time and space, yeah? Now, at the top of that pyramid, and again, I don't believe this for 1 second, is a human being. We have more time than any other animal. We have more safety than any other. We have an easier time getting our food. So we built homes. And we built roofs overhead. We made ourselves clothing. And probably the biggest thing human beings did, we learned how to live very close to each other. There's a greater density of human beings living in a small space than any other large mammal. We figured out how to get along. Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You put this many monkeys in. First of all, they wouldn't have enough food. It'd be very simple. But we learned how to not just have enough food, but how to psychologically live very close to each other. So they explain it all in evolutionary terms. Here's the key. All of that takes brains and takes work. Now here comes a critical turning point. You have so much brains and you have so much time, you start to spoil yourself. Meaning, instead of using your playtime to learn new things, you use your playtime to waste it. And I'll give you an example in monkeys. If you go over to an animal and give it something which is very sweet, but it's not healthy for it, if you'll give it, I don't know how true this is, but to some extent this is true. If you'll give it to a primitive animal, give it to a lizard, he's not going to eat it. If you give it to a monkey, he will. The smarter they are, the more they have a yetzer hara, the more they're able to say, this isn't good for me, but it tastes good, so I'm going to eat it anyway. Human beings have made waste a culture. We made it a way of life. So from a perspective of evolution, and again, I don't think for 1 second we came from animals, but the way they explain it in the animal world gives you an insight into what's happened to people. People used to be very hungry, very cold, very alone, and very afraid. So they worked very hard to stay alive. They had small communities because they lived in larger communities. Either there wasn't enough food, they'd be killing each other from jealousy and competition. And we lived very spread out. And when community people met each other, their feeling was, I have to kill him before he kills me. And they didn't have enough brain power to develop the political skills to talk things through, so they shouldn't start wars and kill one another. Yeah? And since then, we've built homes, built communities, we've figured out negotiating techniques. We're not perfect, but human beings have learned how to make their lives very good. Now, what have we done with our very good lives? We've invented a television. We've invented an internet. We've invented restaurants. We've invented entities of pleasure that serve no, and I'm going to use a bad word now, no evolutionary purpose. At that point, you start going backwards. You see what I'm saying? Now, it used to be that a tiny percentage of people had access to this kind of resource. That means kings, princes, noble people. They were the people who had enough money to entertain themselves in a wasteful way. And what happened to those people was, because of their possibility for wastefulness, they became wasteful, and by the time it went from generation to generation, the children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren became so dumb, they couldn't hold on to that wealth. They couldn't hold on to that power, because they were not working.
Because they didn't earn it.
Right? No, earning it is one thing. You don't have to earn it, you have to value it. And you have to, your brain has to continue in the direction of hard work and growth. Human beings have made laziness into a culture. And again, more than anything else, I don't like to use the word laziness, although it's the right word, waste. And the number one thing we waste isn't food, isn't physical, natural resources. The biggest thing we waste is time. And the best example of time waste, as I age and my eyes stop working and I fall asleep in the middle of learning, is kids don't start to learn till they're 6 or 7 or 8. The best years of that child's life have been wasted on Legos. And we tell ourselves we're teaching them how to cut. We're giving them fine motor skills and gross motor skills. It's so inefficient. If kids would start to learn how to read when they're 3, and how to reason when they're 4 or 5, relative to what we have, we'd have a generation that would be far more intelligent. Now, don't misunderstand. Being smart doesn't make you a mensch. Being smart can make you into a mad scientist. You have to teach religion. You have to teach right and wrong. You have to teach goodness. You have to teach people kindness. You have to teach people honesty. You have to teach people compromise. In other words, making people smart. They think that the smarter you are, the better you are. And history has proven that one of the worst people in the world was smart. Napoleon was smart. He was a Russian Medusha. So it's not enough to teach intelligence, but from a pedagogic point of view, if kids were learning much, much younger, the kids at that age can learn many languages. Kids at that age, it's not hard. It's a question of culture. It's a question of the community. It's a question of how we decide to live. Now the thing is, if you in America try to teach your 3-year-old to live like that, you'd raise a nut. Because you cannot ignore your environment. You have, in other words, there's a world in which we live, and your kids have to raised in that world, otherwise they're not going to survive in that world. If you make a super genius, but time he's 7 years old, he knows Tanya by heart, but he's the butt of every joke, you ruined your child. You can't do this as an individual, but as a culture, as a community, we could do this. This is where we're at. And historically, there's never been a time and place where more people, I'm talking about the West, okay? There's people in the Far East who still don't have enough. People in Africa who don't have enough. There's people in South America who don't have enough. And they're surviving. They're their brain, forgive me for using this bad word again, is evolving. They're learning new foods. They're learning because they have to. We have used all of our success to go backwards, to stop using our brain. I don't need to. I'll be entertained. I'm rich. You know what the answer to every Western problem is? I can afford it. Whether it's a medical problem, whether it's a psychological problem, whether it's an intellectual problem, whether it's a mechanical problem, I can afford it. And it's a lie. We can't afford it. People are supposed to grow. When the Rebbe talks about work, and he surprises people by saying, don't retire. Yeah, but I want to go learn in a kollel. Don't retire. You'll die. He's talking about this. People need to work, because when people work, they grow. Work makes us better. And we have made work something that your whole goal is to stop doing. Think about it. Think about it. Now, you get the first word because I'm talking to you. So when you're talking about pleasures, and a human being can choose the pleasure of eating food, and a human being can choose the pleasure of listening, of playing music, you can't compare those two things. One requires more work. Now, if you could have the pleasure of music and the pleasure of psychology, this requires even more work. So the Rebbe Rashab says, you're a shaita for choosing a lesser pleasure. Till pnimis haTorah.
Is it mostly physical work?
There's all kinds of work. And the highest kind of work is intellectual work. Using your mind.
So what did the Rebbe, okay, it's got a mindset, but what did the Rebbe told this person?
Because this is their umnus. The choice was already made. They didn't come to the Rebbe when they were 18 and say, what should I do with my life? They came to the Rebbe when they're 60 and say, what should I do with the rest of my life? And the Rebbe says, you've chosen a path. You've defined what work means for you. You can't change now.
Oh, so it's later on. So
of course. It's not like an 18-year-old comes to the Rebbe and say, what should I do for a living? They live their lives. They have their path. They have their area of expertise. The Rebbe says, you stop doing that, you're going to die. I had a student last year who told me that they had two grandfathers. One grandfather never stopped working. The other grandfather, who was a very intelligent man, decided to move to Jerusalem, retire, and go into one of these kollel. Within months, he had dementia. Within months. He was a medical doctor. He was a very smart guy. And he started to deteriorate. And then this typical story. His grandmother spent 10 years taking care of him until he finally died. And then it's so predictable. And yet this American dream, the American dream is such a nightmare. It's so the opposite of good.
It's hard to work when your surroundings are so lazy.
Right. And this is where Rebbe comes in. This is where Yiddish, you said before, Judaism was amazing. This is why Judaism is amazing. Judaism is amazing because Judaism was written for all times. Hashem made one book, one religion to speak to all peoples in all times. Poor people in the poor conditions, rich people in the rich conditions. And he always has a message that you need to hear today that's going to help you live your life. And in our world, that message is Adam Lam Yivalid, Adam Lam Yulad. Man is made to toil, and is woman. Yeah, but women used to stay home. Of course women stayed home. But washing clothes was a full-time job. Sewing clothes was a full-time job. Cooking meals was a full-time job. Now you have the refrigerator and the freezer and the steam cooker and the stove and all those other things. So a woman has a lot more time. What liberated women? Is it the fact that women decide they're sick and tired of being on the men's heel, or the washing machine?
They could also become a lawyer.
Of course they could. 95% of women's liberation has nothing to do with women revolting. It has to do with technology. Go ahead.
Can we make it short out of this?
Yosef Chaim, I'm going to send this there.
Yeah, by the way.
Make it short out of this
It's
one.
not a short, it's a long. It's 20 minutes.
My question was based off what
You understand, this is total bittul Torah, this is an Aveda Gemara. But this is important. This is very important.
My question was
Teach us
more
how to live life
of,
before we
like,
learn
was-
less.
It was like sort of a comment as well of what you said earlier about how you're saying like with the royal families, where ever since they were so used to luxury, they started deteriorating.
It depends which.
So my question.
Some had seichel. Most.
So I'm
But
saying
the survival of an empire depended on its building. Rome is a perfect example. In Rome, the noble class were the biggest fighters. They went to the front and they risked their lives. And some of them got killed. And then one day they decided They don't want to do it anymore.
Right.
So they paid people. That was the end of Rome. They hired professional mercenaries. And this happened over and over. Now, of course, Roman philosophy was based on kill or be killed. We've evolved from there. We've figured out that actually we're better off give or be given. Yosef Chaim, go ahead.
You basically answered my question.
No, Israel has to have a philosophy of shame or be shamed.
That was more. You more or less answered my question. I was just asking, do you think that's the main cause of the fall of the empires?
Of course. Well, it's so dynamic and it's so complicated. The underlying issue is there is competition.
Right.
Competition has to do with resources. Resources is number one, space. Number two, air. Number three, water. Number four, gold and silver and copper and diamonds and so on and so forth, okay? Everybody wants a little more. There isn't a little more for everybody. So we're competing over the little more. And that little more creates friction. And that friction can get hotter and hotter and hotter. Have you heard of nutmeg?
Nutmeg? No.
Never heard of nutmeg?
Like
Nutmeg is a spice
Okay, I know.
that they found in Asia. There were nutmeg wars.
No, that's opium.
Nutmeg wars. Nutmeg wars. Hundreds in the 17th century. See, they fought wars over access to nutmeg, of a cactus spice. Now, what's going to happen if your food is missing pepper? Can't eat it.
It's killed some people.
It's a luxury. It's portion to luxury. So it wasn't that nutmeg was that important. It was that I should have the nutmeg and not you that was that
I
important.
think it was slightly more.
It was a psychological, no, it's not.
I think it was a money thing.
You're right. Of course it's a money thing. Of course it's a money thing. And if you don't have the money, what? You're going to send your boys and girls to die for a spice? And this is how the world goes. Now what happens is, Yosef Chaim, let's continue our lesson. Yeah, people have a war, and many, many people get killed, and everybody feels terrible, and they sit around the table and they say, we really should never do this again. And that people live, and they tell their children, war is a terrible thing, you should never do it. And 50 years pass. And the people who were killed in that war die. The children who heard from their parents, war is a terrible thing, get old. And the girl children say, we should fight over this nutmeg. It's also terrible, but we'll do okay. We're strong, and we got a lot of weapons, and da-da-da-da-da. And it repeats itself. And then people get killed really, really, really bad. And the worst scenario is when the killing is not that bad. So you keep doing it, you keep doing it, till it gets really bad. And we should never do this again. We're never going to fight another war, right? And then they get old, and they die. And their children tell their grandchildren, Papa used to say war's a terrible thing. He said, well, Papa's dead and buried. You understand? So now, how does Mashiach figure into all of this? Let's make this into religion now. Mashiach's a person, a bus of Adam, who's going to teach these lessons, let's be honest, these lessons to the world. These are very religious lessons. They sound like social lessons. I'm giving you evolutionary language. I'm using the language of a scientist, yeah? But these are Torah lessons. Mashiach is going to teach people the inherent value of hard work, the inherent value of peace, meaning you don't just not fight a war because you remember the last war. You don't fight wars because wars are wrong. You solve your problems through negotiation. That's the way to do it. The thing that's going to make Mashiach special is that he's going to actually convince the people. They're going to believe him. Now, why are they going to believe Mashiach and they didn't believe all the Mashiachs that came before? What's going to make Mashiach different? The only real answer to that question is a spiritual one. The world has changed. That's what the Rebbe said. The world is in a different space. People are ready to hear and accept these messages. Why? Because the history of mankind, from the perspective of Torah, is a classroom.
How do we do that? By doing mitzvahs and Torah?
And by teaching others. The answer to that question is, you have to do your part. We look at ourselves and say, it's never going to happen. What we fail to realize is, all we have to do is our part. And all we're not allowed to not do is say, well, I'm not going to make a difference, I won't do my piece. That's not your concern. Your concern is you have to teach the guy you meet on the airplane the lessons of the Sheva Mitzvahs. Because this is what you can do. You do your part, I do my part, he does his part. And collectively, Mashiach comes. In other words, you have to believe the Rebbe. That's what it is. Believe the Rebbe that now's the time. So wait, let me finish my thought. So there's several dynamics to it. One is the world. The world is ready to learn these lessons. And the Rebbe says it's not because of nuclear bombs and mad. People know that we can kill each other, so we decide not to kill each other. It's spiritually, the people are on a higher level. So I want to go back to my first statement. The world is God's classroom, and we're his students. But he never comes into the classroom and gives instructions, except for once. We learn from trial and error. We learn from mistakes, bloody mistakes. Mistakes that result in famine, mistakes that result in war, mistakes that result in drought. We make mistakes. Right? The history of the world is people making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. And it's the classroom that we slowly mature in. Mashiach is the graduation. Human beings have learned the lessons. And here's the key point. And they've established the memory to not repeat the same mistakes. To actually grow. Meaning Mashiach comes, a kid doesn't work hard because he has to. A kid has to work hard because it's the right thing. A grown-up man and woman who has all the money and all the material things they could possibly have is hardworking and generous and virtuous and righteous because they make those choices because they're correct. Mashiach is going to teach the same thing the Torah is teaching for 5,000 years, but because of various factors, beginning with the fact that we've gone through 5,000 years of history, we're going to learn them. We're going to take the lessons, we're going to apply them to our lives. In other words, you can explain Mashiach as a very down-to-earth thing. But we have to bring Mashiach, and we have to bring Mashiach by teaching goodness, believing that rebbe, that this is the time. If we teach now, people will learn, and they're not going to forget the lessons. It's a different time. And to speak about from a historical angle, this is one of the best proofs. There has never been a generation in the history of the world where more people are in a position to waste than ever. 150 years ago, most people worked very, very hard just to stay alive. Their lives were very hard. What have we done in the last 150 years? We've taught ourselves how to waste, how to entertain. Okay, it began with toys. 150 years ago, the average child's toy was a stick, was a pebble. And when he was playing with that stick and that pebble, he was also learning lessons about what you can do with a stick and do with a pebble. Now, we don't let our kids near sticks and pebbles. We create plastic toys that are designed with the imagination of adults that are dafke not adult-like. If you give a child an opportunity to play with anything in the world, you know what he'll do? He'll imitate his parents. He doesn't want to play with Legos. He wants to hold a machete. I read a whole article on this years ago, where in primitive civilizations, 2-year-olds they're carrying babies around. Their little brothers, and they almost never hurt them. Little kids are carrying around machetes, and they almost never hurt themselves or others. You're talking about 3 or 4-year-olds. I'm sorry.
It's almost a pretty big.
What do you mean? I don't get
I can't. No. It's not. And what? And with the artificial toys. In other words, what we have done is we've created an imaginary world for our children. Dolls.
So what's the problem?
Because it's fake.
Well, actually, the doll was
What we're doing to our children, no, what we're doing to our children is we're saying don't work, play. Or to say it more precisely, don't play in a way which is educational, play in a way that's wasteful. And there's nothing more wasteful than the television.
Get them educated toys? No.
They don't need educated toys. They just need to be allowed to learn what the adults are doing and imitate it. That's how God made them.
Well, hopefully they have good father figures.
But you see, but it's complicated because you can't not buy your kids Legos. Because as I said to you earlier, if you're going to raise a kid the way I'm describing in our civilization, you're going to destroy him. They have to live amongst their peers. But you want your child to be on the high end, not of having more toys, of hard work. In all areas, not just in the brain, in the body, and in doing kindness.
It's not from genetic genes.
Oh, it comes from a lot of things, but one of the things it comes from is instruction. Teach your child that you don't work because you have to. You do it because I work on a person. You don't get up in the morning because you have to have a job or because you're going to great adventures. You get up in the morning because that's what people do. I have an uncle. He's a radical about this, but he has many children. And he's very involved in the home. You know, some men are not so involved. If one of his children is sick, he says, get up, get dressed, daven, eat breakfast, go back to sleep. And they hated it. Because in every other home, the kids are sleeping till noon. And I'm talking even 8-year-olds, let alone teenagers. But even as teenagers. But now as adults, they say, my father gave me good values. He taught me the value of time. He taught me the value of a morning. And now they're very happy about it. Now the question is, will they repeat that with their children? You see, this is the actionist. He had to be a very stubborn man. And this was what he believed. Our role is to teach our children the value of work for its own sake. And of course, for children, work is school. In all areas, including Midas Tevis, right? And in terms of the big picture, in terms of Mashiach, we have to teach the world these values. The worst thing in the world is passive entertainment. We talked before about passive learning. Right? What's the difference in holding a Gemara and listening to a shiur? Right? The answer is, are you swallowing somebody else's digestive foods, or are you digesting the food for yourself? You need to digest the food for yourself. Now, if you can't do it, you can't do it. I'm the first person to say use English help and listen to shiurim, but appreciate the value of work. On your level, you need to work, and then you need to push yourself. And the thing about our civilization is, historically, it's never been this way. You choose it. 150 years ago, people were very, very poor. Yeah? And there were universities, there were colleges, and lahavdil, elf avados, the yeshivas. Poor kids worked like mishagoyim to be given entry into these schools. Why? They couldn't afford to pay. They had to give it what they called scholarships. There were few positions available in these schools, so there was a competitive element. What's today? Anybody can go to any school, whatever it is, but the point is, they don't care to work that hard. Because our claim to fame is waste, entertainment.
So
And by the way, one of the other things we waste is relationships. Parents, put them on old age. Children, throw them out at 18. Siblings, this one's a criminal, this one's an idiot, this one's a Republican. Hate them all. So you make artificial friends. It's all part of this wasteful model. Now, what the good news is that we have these tests because we can manage them. In other words, as bad as we're doing better than any other generation in the past would have done. Mashiach comes into this scenario, and this is what he does. It's not miracles. It's not miracles. It's not miracles. It's education. And the miracle is going to be that we're going to allow ourselves to be educated. Huh? We learned something today, Chaim?
Yes.
Okay, I'll see you tomorrow.